Well, if you're a real Christian, you've obviously seen at least one episode of the Veggie Tales. There'll never, ever, ever, ever be a show like Veggie Tales. One of my favorites that I've watched more than once with my grandchildren is Dave and the Giant Pickle, the Veggie Tales rendition of the biblical account of David and Goliath. And I'd like to give you my rendition of it as we read 1 Samuel 17, remembering that Jesus read these same words and that he learned from them, no doubt more than I'll be able to point out to you. But this record is filled with valid, relevant principles that you can apply in your life today, tomorrow, and every day as long as you live. And obviously everyone's heard the story, the metaphor of Goliath and David is used in sports all the time when a great underdog is pitted against an overwhelming favorite in the title game. Of course, I live in Indianapolis, and the Butler Bulldogs squared off against the Duke Blue Devils last April the 5th in the NCAA championship game. And the David and Goliath metaphor was once again employed by numerous sports writers. And yet, this really happened, and Goliath was really a big stinking giant. Would have been quite the post player had he known the game of basketball. So let's see what we can find here. Let these truths penetrate your heart and let the Lord minister to you as to how to apply them in your life, because each of us has some Goliaths, and if we don't, we will. And we want to dispatch them with the same power of God that David got rid of this creep. Verse 1, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war. Boo! That's the bad guys. What were the forces behind them? Evil spirits. The devil is trying to get rid of the Christ line that God had identified through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. That was the bloodline of the Messiah. He was going to come and eventually destroy the devil. The devil throughout the Old Testament was always trying to destroy the Christ line. That's the point of all of these records here. So they pitched their camp, and the other guys pitched theirs, and they were each on a hill on one side of the valley, going across to one another. A champion means a tough fighter named Goliath, who was from Gath. That's not good. If you go back to Joshua 11, Numbers 13, you're going to find information about the Nephilim, the mutant offspring of fallen angels that cohabited with women, and that's what wiped out. God had to wipe out the whole race, which was so mutated, other than Noah and his wife and their 3 sons and their wives. So 8 people survived the flood. The rest of the Nephilim didn't, and God was doing that to once again purify things and kind of start over. But somehow the Nephilim had infiltrated again. And Gath and Goliath, he's not normal. Look at it right here. He was more than 9 feet tall. And some scholars who vary on the length of the cubit would say that he was even taller than that. We're talking goaltending. Okay? If you don't know what I'm talking about, God have mercy on you. That's basketball. Anyway, now, he was more than 9 feet tall, but he had to still put on all this armor. Listen to this. He had a bronze helmet on his head, wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. That's 150 to 200 pounds. Big chicken. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. His spear was ridiculously large, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. That's 15 to 20 pounds. The head of his spear. You know what a 10 pound, well, it's usually they have 10, 25, 35, 45 at the gym, but they have dumbbells, so you can get a 20-pound weight as a spearhead. You can't throw that very far unless you're giant. And then it says, his shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath came out into the middle of the valley, and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for a battle when you're not even going to fight?" That's what he's saying. Am I not a Philistine? And are not you the servants of Saul? Pick somebody to come out here and face me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. That was a lie, as we'll see. But anyway, but if I overcome him and kill him, then you become our subjects and serve us. And the Veggie Tale guys say, and you have to scratch our backs in that spot right in the middle where we can't reach no matter how hard we try. It's a little more subdued version of the account. Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now we're going to see in a few verses that David, a teenager, will hear the same words. And instead of being dismayed and terrified, he is downright indignant. What? Who does that punk think he is? That's what he's going to say. Why? Because David no doubt remembered the words in Deuteronomy 20, 1-4, which the rest of the folks didn't. And here's what it said here. And this is part of the law and everything. I think this is Moses speaking here. But anyway, it says, when you go to war against your enemies and you see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, do not be afraid. Would that be something that could induce fear? Sure. Do not be afraid of them, because Yahweh, your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. In other words, remember the Red Sea trick? That was significant, wasn't it? Well, if he can do that, he could do other things to help you. He'll be with you. When you are about to go into battle, the priest shall come forward and address the army. He shall say, "Hear, O Israel, today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not be terrified or give way to panic before them, because Yahweh, your God, is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory." Anyway, they had apparently forgotten that, and they were freaking. Now David, meanwhile back at the ranch, David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah, and Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time as the king, he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. Firstborn was Eliab, second Abinadab, the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, Goliath came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Twice a day, he gets all of his stuff on, gets the armor bearer. Let's go, Fred. Sure, Big G. And then he goes out. Hey, where's your man? 40 days. That's 80 times he came out and said that. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers, and hurry to their camp, and take 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit, because that's what happened. The families supplied the army and so forth. And when you're there, see how your brothers are doing, excuse me, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Well, not exactly. They weren't exactly fighting. I'd say cowering, quavering, trembling, but not fighting. All right? So, early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out as Jesse had directed. Why does it say that? Could it be showing us that David had built godly habits into his life? Could it be anything about the will to win versus the will to prepare to win? He got up early in the morning. This kid was a mover and a shaker. That's not a sin to sleep in, but you don't want to sleep in every day. I mean, in the morning is quiet, get a lot done, get your day started with prayer, whatever. It's not bad. All right, you work the night shift, so pretend the night is morning, whatever. Then he left the flock with a shepherd. He knew his responsibilities and he covered them. He loaded up, set out, as Jesse had directed. He followed orders. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. I think it was heartless shouting, rather perfunctory. Oh my God, we've got to yell again. Go, go, go. I don't know. I went to infantry OCS one time at Fort Benning. Once upon a time, it was 23 hot, grueling weeks. And we used to jog everywhere chanting about how we are infantry and follow me. And I wasn't sure where we were going, but we were asking people to follow. Anyway, they were doing the war cry, hubba, hubba, hooah, whatever, booyah. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines to see how his brothers were doing. The plot thickens. As he was talking with them, damn, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran. Next two words are the key, because in a few verses, David's going to run too. They ran away from Goliath. Now the Israelites had been saying, this was previously back in their camp, they were discussing the bleak situation, and they said, do you see how this man keeps coming out? I mean, dadgummit, he comes out to defy Israel. You know, the king has promised a big reward for whoever could take him out. He will give great wealth to the man who kills him, and he'll also give him his daughter in marriage, and he will exempt his father's family from taxes. Now, that's a pretty good package, so it seems. Anyway, it doesn't say much about the daughter, but anyway. David asked the man standing near. This was now back in the moment when Goliath came out. What do you get for killing this guy? Who is this uncircumcised? Let's read it. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? What was the difference between David's attitude and the attitude of the rest of the Israelite army. The Israelites looked at Goliath and compared him to themselves. And he looked giant, and they ran that way. David, on the other hand, looked at Goliath and compared him to the living God. And Goliath looked like a pipsqueak compared to the living God. What are the Goliaths in your life? How big is your God? Why was David able to have such a mammoth perspective of God so that the opposition shrunk like the Honey, I Shrunk the Soldier? Because he had walked and talked with God and built these habits in his life, and he had utilized the power of God in smaller situations, building his faith. He's going to say that. He's going to say it. We'll keep going here. They repeated to him what had been saying and told him, this is what will be done. You get this, this, and this. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, watch this, he burned with anger. I wonder why. He burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And who'd you leave the few sheep with? I'll bet you didn't leave them with anybody. I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. If I were David, I would have said, excuse me, bro, I don't see any battle. I see you people shaking in your boots. Guess what? If you step out and separate yourself from the crowd to do what's right, you will be a target of ridicule and lies and persecution. Eliab is a coward and a cop-out, and he's taken out his own internal guilt and shame and whatever on his brother. Creep. Look at David, 29. Now what have I done? Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else, brought up the same manner, and the man said, yeah, you get this, this, and this. Finally, what David said was overheard and reported to Saul. Saul heard about David, and Saul sent for him. And David stepped right up to Saul and he said, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. You know, they always do that now. Anyway, Saul replied, what are you, nuts? That's one of the great lines from the Veggie Tales when David says, I'll go out and handle the guy. The rest of the little French peas or whatever they are say, what are you, nuts? So that's what Saul said. You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy. And he's been a fighting man from his youth. I mean, he was 26 pounds at birth. You're only a boy. Chances are David is 14, 13, 14, 15, something like that. A teenager. But David said to Saul, let me tell you something. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and give me that sheep, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and stuck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. Wait a minute. A lion, maybe a mountain lion, whatever, some kind of lion. That's intimidating. I mean, anybody, teenager, whatever, lions, that's intimidating. A bear, I don't want to tangle with one of those. But David wasn't going to let one of those sheep be taken. That was his responsibility, and he took it seriously. That's why he was sleeping on a bear rug. All right, 37. Yahweh, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will deliver me from the paw of this creepy Philistine. Hey, remember your past. Cherish your victories. Remember how God has worked with you, and build your faith on that, and keep stepping out and counting on Him to work with you for greater victories and greater and greater. Saul said to David, okay, go ahead. I mean, no one else is going to go. Go ahead and Yahweh be with you. But just in case he's not, he dressed David in his own tunic, put a coat of armor on him, and picture it, like a suit of armor, and a bronze helmet on his head. Clank. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to it. He said, I can't go anywhere in this stuff. I'm not used to them. Get this off. He took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. I used to have a whammo slingshot, wood that was about that thick, like this, and then down with a big handle and a big rubber. That thing was, did you shoot ball bearings with that? I mean, you could kill someone easily. Anyway, I wasn't aiming at people, but it's kind of, you look. That's not the kind of slingshot he had. This thing had one end that you held with your hand, then the other end would dangle down, then you'd pick it up and wrap it a certain way, and it had a little pouch thing in the middle, and you put a stone in there, and you're holding some way, like part of it with one part of your hand, the other. You went like this, and you let go of one end of it, and then the rock in the sling would fly out. Does that sound hard to you? Oh my gosh. Does that sound like it would take practice? Wow. 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 That was the sound of David practicing against an old oak tree out in the pasture by the sheep. By the hour. Wow. 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 Maybe he didn't even hit the tree at first. Do you know how much practice it would take with one of those things to be able to throw it accurately? Like those hockey competition where they shoot the puck and hit part of a plate sticking out there like that. You got to be good. So here's David. He's got his stuff. Meanwhile, on the other side of the valley, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He's out there giving his, hey, well, give me somebody to fight. 40 days, come on, you chickens. All of a sudden, he sees this young kid coming out there. He looked David over, saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? David had a staff in his hand. Dogs were, I mean, even today in many countries, dogs are worthless, useless. You feed them scraps to keep them around your house so they bark if you have an intruder, but nobody lets them in the house or pets them like we do. They don't sleep on the bed with you. Certainly not in that culture. They were kind of like scum. Anyway, so am I a dog? Dang right, dog. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And we know that Dagon was one of the Philistine gods. So this could have been the origin of the phrase, daggone it. Something like that. Anyway, he said, get over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Rah! Hey, the word, I believe it's in 1 Peter, talks about the roaring lion, that the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour, 5:8, I think it is. Anyway, have you ever been bitten by a roaring lion? Me neither. Watch this. Rah! That's what you do when you roar. That's what you do when you bite. So you can't roar and bite. The roaring lion is just to scare the prey. And man, this guy was scary. This was scary. I'll bet you David's heart was pounding. But David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin and your little shield bearer. But I come against you in the name of Yahweh Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Listen, we got to face our fear. Maybe we have to do it afraid. Joyce Meyer has a teaching called Do It Afraid. Good teaching. Maybe we have to do it afraid. But when we face our fear and walk into it with the Lord, it often evaporates. And if it doesn't, then we can still conquer it with his power. And he says this day, because you can put God on the spot. When you're standing in integrity before God, you can put him on the spot and expect that he comes through. And he said this day, Yahweh, he's out there in the valley, both armies listening. Oh my gosh. This day Yahweh will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your ugly head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. Why? Because the Christ line will be preserved, and eventually Israel will be the crown jewel of the world in the millennial kingdom, so forth and so on. Anyway, that was all in the future, but all those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that Yahweh saves. Could be that he's, tells us sometimes to use weapons, but that's not it. For the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give all of you into our hands. It's a reciprocal. David just didn't turn around after that. He will give you all in our hands. Okay, see ya. And walk away, and they all just died. That wasn't it. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran. He ran toward Goliath. The Israelites had run away. He ran quickly. He was running fast toward the battle line, reaching into his bag while he was running and taking out a stone. And somehow, while he's running, putting it in the pouch of the sling and starting to build up some momentum with it. He slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead, one of the few open places on the guy, because he had to be able to see right between the eyes. The stone sank into his forehead. And of course he said, as he was going down, a thing like that never entered my head before. And he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David kept running, and he stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword, which was big, no doubt, and drew it out of the scabbard and stuck him and ran him through and then chopped off his head. Yeah, I bet you that was what was coming from the Israelite side. But when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Wait a minute, he said they'd be their servants. They should have said, okay, we give up. They fled. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and all the way to Ohio. Oh, that's Ekron. Sorry, that's Ekron, not Akron. The dead were strewn all over the place. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem, and he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, this was as David was going out, "Whose son is that young man? Surely as you live, O king, I don't know. Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistines, Abner took him, brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's ugly head. And he said, "Whose son are you, young man?" He said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." And a new chapter in David's life was about to begin. What are the Goliaths in your life? I'm sure you have some. I have some. How will we dispatch them, conquer them, deal with them in a godly way? By building our faith, to trust God, to show us what to do, how to do it, and then to work with us to provide, to bring up the slack, to take up the slack, stand in the gap that we can't, and make it happen for us. Because we can only do what we can do, and God will work with us in a reciprocal relationship, just like he did with David, who was a teenager. So, hey, you can be young at heart. If you're long past the teen years, you can be spiritually young at heart, and you can continue to build your faith, and you can continue to walk with God and see the power of God manifest in your life also when you stand up for him.